Arkansas, man, oh man, what a day. 20-10, a win over Texas A&M. This was a pleasure to experience. And I mean a real pleasure to experience. Now, I know a lot of us spoke out during the week about how we would much prefer it be in College Station or much prefer it be in Fayetteville, but that is what it is. We don't have any control over that. But what a year to be an Arkansas season ticket holder. You've already had a decade's worth of memories in September. To do what you did to Texas and to now do what you did to Texas A&M, and you haven't even flipped that calendar to October. It's barely fall, and you've already pulled that off. That was memorable. I saw a lot of your faces yesterday. I spoke to a lot of you before and in a much more jubilant fashion afterwards. But what a memorable scene post-game. I'm going to tell you about that in just a second. It was so great to witness. I know a lot of you saw some of the footage I posted on the social channels, at Late Kick Josh, by the way. A lot of extra stuff there that you're not going to see on the show. But what a padlock stat. Sometimes the padlock stats are really complicated. Sometimes you got to dive in. It's something per yards or something per game. Here's the padlock stat. Arkansas led this game 17-0 in the first quarter. The end. That was the padlock stat. Because as it turns out, the game was already over at that point. We just didn't know it quite yet. Sometimes scoring margins are kind of relative. Back in the old school Big 12 days, you could be up 3 touchdowns, and it felt like it was still a seesaw, back and forth affair. This game yesterday, especially if you were watching into the second half, got down to a one-possession game. And as I was telling Director Colin, I was on the sideline for this whole game. It felt like in the building, much to the credit of the A&M fans, it felt like they were trying as best they could to grab the throat of that old momentum. And they tried, but to no avail. It never felt like it swung. And that's rare. It's rare because Arkansas hasn't been there before. But Arkansas has a been there, done that quality about themselves, even though a lot of these folks have not been there before, which is impressive. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a second, but it cannot be overstated. The only thing fluky was the final score. If you watched the rest of college football yesterday, you saw a lot of final scores that were not indicative, and you saw a lot of teams that lost even though they outgained them, or they had a better yards per play edge. They had more explosive plays. Maybe they just turned the ball over a lot. That was not the case here. Arkansas, if you were to just read a box score, probably runs it up even more than they did on Texas A&M. They missed a chance at points near halftime. You had KJ Jefferson, their starting quarterback, in and out of the game early portions of the second half, and yet they still never relinquished control of the game. Big credit to them because, again, that's the kind of spot that a lesser team and probably a younger team that is new to that environment, new to that stage, sort of gets a little jelly-legged in. Maybe they don't lose it, but at the very least, you throw them in a blender for a little while. But I'll tell you the best part is they won with a different style. Because if I'm telling you that you're beating Texas A&M by double digits, you probably think that that coincides with an Arkansas rushing performance of 2.25, 2.5, maybe even 300 yards. And that really wasn't the case. They had big plays from Treylon Burks. I think he had 6 catches over 160 yards. A.J. Green. It was all about explosive plays through the air for Arkansas early. Now, where have we said that before? Very rarely. I think they're going to need it again this week against Georgia. But Ridgeway had a big game. Trey Williams, I was standing next to an A&M staffer who I think 3 times over the span of one drive said, "Who's 55? Who is that?" Trey Williams. That's who that is. They killed it. Arkansas just killed it on the transfer portal market. I mean, a lot of those guys, for instance, on the defensive line, who you see starting, Trey Williams chief among them, transfers. So they got it done there. And now we get to look ahead. But first I want to talk about A&M for just a second. Then I'm going to talk about Arkansas some more. I know that there is a lot of reaction out there today that is sweeping in nature. And you got to overhaul everything. We got to burn it down, and we got to build from scratch here and from scratch there. I don't think it's overly complicated, guys. They don't have a quarterback, because the one they were going to be rolling with got hurt. Sometimes it's as cut and dry as that. Offensive line is an issue for them. And so even when Zach Calzada has time, he doesn't think he has time. But you got backup quarterback, you got banged up offensive line, banged up receiver core. And the reason we on this show picked Arkansas to win the game outright was because of just that. There was no quarterback edge for the favorite here. If anything, the quarterback edge was in the side of Arkansas. And we thought that before the game. Certainly everyone thinks that now. But the second part is the most important part. Which program looked like they were playing with the more well-recognizable identity? A&M doesn't have an offensive identity. You can have a play sheet a mile long. Jimbo Fisher can flip through a phone book over there if he wants to. There is no offensive set that accounts for quarterback not being able to stand in the pocket, O-line not being able to establish pocket. There's nothing he can do. You can call all you want. There's nothing he can do. Meanwhile, Arkansas just goes on their merry way, and they look like they're in complete control. So I don't think there's any need to overhaul anything. I just think it is what it is at some point with Texas A&M. This is a quote, by the way, from Jeff Tarpley, who runs our Texas A&M 24/7 site. I think this summarized things very well. At one point yesterday, Texas A&M was playing 4 true or redshirt freshmen and had only 3 players in the same spots as they played in the Orange Bowl. That was just this past year. You've also got a backup quarterback who's being asked to carry the load on offense. Juxtapose that to the comments Jimbo Fisher had in his post-game setting. Someone asked him, how much better does Arkansas look? And he said, look like the same players I've been facing since I've been here. And he's dead on the money accurate. And that is what made the post-game scene so memorable. Jimbo's right. A lot of these guys have been there since basically he got to Texas A&M. A lot of these guys are 22, 23 years old. There were tears on that field yesterday. There was a massive outpouring of emotion. And you want to know why? Because it means something. And it has nothing to do with the playoff, and it has nothing to do with the postseason. It has to do with the fact that a lot of these same folks, support staff, coaching staff in some cases, players especially, players most of all, experience things like having Western Kentucky drum you in your own building. Those guys remember that. And so no one really cared who they were going to play next week after this game yesterday. No one really cared about anything other than that moment. Again, that's what college football is about. It's about Saturdays. It's not about 2 or 3 weeks down the road. It's not about 2 or 3 months down the road. No one cared. And it was really a pleasure to be around it. No one was in a hurry to leave the field. There was family all around the place. There were hugs. Again, a lot of tears. And you may watch that if you are a fan of, let's say, the New England Patriots or the Seattle Seahawks. And you may say, it's a regular season game. Yep, it's a regular season game. That's exactly what it is. And if you don't get it, that's okay. Maybe this sport's not for you. But for those who do get it, you understand exactly why that scene would be the way it is. 9 years is a long time. And that's how long it had been since they beat those guys from College Station. But I'll tell you what stood out the most to me is around the halfway point of this game, or as you may know at halftime, with these teams that are newer to the head table, I like to observe them sometimes in the way they carry themselves. And let me tell you what happens most of the time. And this doesn't necessarily mean anything in and of itself, but a lot of times if a team is achieving something that they've been told they're not supposed to achieve, i.e. an underdog has an early lead, I'll go up a tunnel if I can, and in this case, Jerry Jones has an entire zip code to himself, so I go up Arkansas's tunnel, and I watch them come off the field after the first half. And they look like Alabama. They carried themselves like Alabama. They carried themselves like a team that had been there before, and they haven't. It was very impressive, because most of the time what you have is you got players bouncing off the walls, and you got everyone jacked up, and that's fine. You got every reason to be, which makes it all the more impressive when you look so subdued, like you're about halfway through a mission, and all right, I'm going to go to the kitchen, get something, I'll be right back, and then I'll just press play and we'll continue the movie. And that's exactly what they did. Arkansas hit pause for a second, and then they went back out there, and things went haywire, and yet they never relinquished control of the game. Hats off to Sam Pittman. Hats off to Arkansas. Met so many of you yesterday. A lot of Arkansas staffers came up and said some things to me after the game, but it all revolves around how special the moment is for the organization, especially for the folks who have been there and experienced the down times. The good times for a true freshman, they don't even know how good they are. You could tell yesterday, based on facial expression, the folks that have been there for a long time versus the folks who were kind of new to the whole process, because the ones who had been there for a long time were looking up all over the place. Some of them had, tear streams down their face. And the true freshmen, they just had saucer eyes. But it was great to see. It was great to be around. Arkansas at Georgia, Saturday. College game day in the house. How about that?